Thomas Delaney, a 40-year-old FBI agent, was known for his sharp intelligence, attention to detail, and calm demeanor. With nearly 2 decades of experience, he had earned a reputation as one of the most trusted agents in the department. His career had flourished, and it seemed that his life was in perfect balance. He had built a picture-perfect life with his wife Helen of 15 years. They lived in a beautiful home, had 2 children, and were active in social circles, always appearing as the perfect couple. On the surface, Thomas had it all. He was admired by his peers and colleagues, known for his steady presence in the field and his dedication to his work. Helen, too, was an accomplished woman in her own right. She was well-educated, successful, and fiercely independent. Together, they appeared to have the ideal marriage, often praised by others as a role model for what a relationship should be. But beneath the surface, Thomas was battling an internal conflict that would soon spiral out of control, unraveling everything he had worked for. It started when Thomas met Sarah Price, a young, ambitious, and strikingly beautiful woman in the FBI office. Sarah had joined as an administrative assistant, but her hard-working attitude quickly caught the eye of her superiors. Thomas, in particular, was impressed by her energy and dedication, and their professional relationship soon grew into something more. What began as harmless interactions and casual conversations developed into a full-fledged affair. Sarah, eager to build a career in public service, was drawn to Thomas's authority and experience in the FBI. His success and powerful aura captivated her, and before long, their connection became an escape from the stresses of their respective lives. For Thomas, the affair with Sarah was a way to escape his growing dissatisfaction at home. His marriage to Helen had become strained. Long work hours, late-night calls, and emotional distance made the attraction to Sarah feel irresistible. The affair was his chance to feel wanted, to feel alive, something he was no longer getting from his marriage. It became a secret, thrilling escape from the pressures of his life. Helen, though, had always been a supportive wife. She had always put her family first, standing by Thomas as he climbed the ranks in the FBI. She knew how demanding his job was and supported his ambitions unconditionally. But as the years passed, cracks began to appear in their marriage. Thomas became increasingly distant. At first, Helen chalked it up to the stress of his demanding career. But as time went on, his behavior raised more serious concerns. Late nights, secretive calls, and strange changes in his demeanor didn't escape her notice. Helen's suspicions were confirmed one day when she overheard a conversation between Thomas and a colleague, mentioning Sarah Price. The way Thomas spoke about Sarah, an undertone of admiration, set off alarm bells in Helen's mind. She didn't want to believe it, but the signs were undeniable. Despite her doubts, she refused to confront Thomas, unwilling to believe that the man she loved could betray her. However, the situation escalated. One evening, after Thomas left for work, Helen decided to check his belongings. What she found shattered her world. Text messages between Thomas and Sarah were unmistakably flirtatious promises of love, plans to run away together. Her perfect life came crashing down around her. It was no longer a suspicion, it was an undeniable reality. Her husband had betrayed her with the young woman who worked in the same office. The life she had built was a lie. Sarah Price, on the other hand, had moved to Washington, D.C. with dreams of building a career in public service. She quickly caught Thomas's attention with her work ethic and enthusiasm. Initially, their professional relationship was just that, professional. But as time passed, they began spending more time together, and their connection grew deeper. Thomas confided in Sarah about his frustrations at work, his unhappy marriage, and his longing for something more fulfilling. Sarah, eager to please, began meeting him outside of work, sharing meals and drinks. What started as a simple fling for Sarah soon became something more. As their emotional and physical connection deepened, she began to believe that their relationship was special, that one day they would be together without secrets and lies. But Sarah was blind to the consequences of their affair. She didn't realize how close they were to a breaking point. Her feelings for Thomas grew deeper, and she started demanding more time, more attention, more commitment. For Thomas, though, the affair was a means of escape, not something he was willing to risk everything for. He cared for Sarah, but his career, reputation, and marriage still mattered more. Despite his growing affection for her, he continually dismissed her demands for a deeper commitment. He was afraid of the consequences, both professionally and personally, and continued to keep Sarah at arm's length. The affair had been ongoing for over 2 years when Helen discovered it. During that time, Thomas and Sarah had taken every precaution to keep their relationship a secret. They exchanged cryptic messages, met in secluded places, and maintained their connection during stolen moments. But as the affair continued, the burden of their deception began to weigh on them. Sarah, who had hoped for a future with Thomas, began pressuring him for more. She wanted their relationship to be more than just an affair, but Thomas was unwilling to make that leap. Meanwhile, Helen became more and more suspicious. She started tracking Thomas's movements, paying attention to his increasing detachment and strange behavior. When she found the incriminating messages on his phone, there was no turning back. She had confirmation of his betrayal. The perfect world she had built with Thomas had been a lie. The pain and betrayal were overwhelming, and it pushed her to a breaking point. The discovery set off a chain of events that would lead to a tragic, irreversible act of violence. On the night of the murder, Thomas came home late, as he often did after meeting with Sarah. Helen, still reeling from the shock of discovering the affair, waited for him in the living room. She had been consumed by the poison of betrayal, her mind clouded with anger and hurt. When Thomas walked through the door, he immediately sensed that something was wrong. Before he could speak, Helen asked him about his relationship with Sarah. Thomas tried to justify his actions, explaining the affair as something he regretted, but it was too late for words. Helen wasn't interested in excuses or promises of change. In a moment of pure rage, she retrieved a gun from the closet, aimed it at Thomas, and pulled the trigger. The gunshot rang out, and Thomas collapsed to the floor, his life ending in an instant. Helen stood over him, the gun still in her hand, her heart pounding in shock. She hadn't planned for it to end like this, but the betrayal, the heartbreak, had pushed her too far. When the police arrived, they found her motionless beside Thomas's lifeless body. There were no signs of struggle, no attempts at self-defense. Just an eerie stillness in the room. Helen, in a calm voice, made the call to report the murder. Her lack of panic immediately raised suspicions. At first, the police considered the possibility of a crime of passion, a sudden outburst fueled by overwhelming betrayal. But as they dug deeper into the investigation, they began to piece together a much darker picture. The evidence pointed to a premeditated crime. They discovered that Helen had been tracking Thomas's movements for months. She had installed tracking software on his phone, kept detailed records of his meetings with Sarah, and followed his social media activity. The investigation revealed that Helen had been harboring anger and resentment for a long time. They found Helen's diaries filled with graphic descriptions of her emotional turmoil and fantasies of revenge. She had confided in a close friend about her plan to confront Thomas, but the friend had advised her to talk to him instead. Helen had already made up her mind. She had meticulously planned the confrontation, choosing the right moment when Thomas would be alone and unsuspecting. She had even purchased the gun weeks in advance, waiting for the perfect time to act. Helen, the devoted wife and mother, had transformed into a murderer. Some saw her as a victim of an unfaithful husband who had shattered her world, while others viewed her as a cold-blooded killer. The case drew intense media coverage, and the public's opinions were divided. Some sympathized with Helen, believing that the betrayal had driven her to the brink. Others saw her as manipulative, someone who had executed her plan without regard for the consequences. As the trial approached, the nation watched with bated breath. Would Helen be seen as a victim of betrayal or as a woman who allowed her emotions to spiral into something monstrous? The investigation also turned to Sarah, the woman who had unknowingly been the catalyst for the tragic events. She was questioned by the police, her emotions a mix of confusion and fear as she tried to make sense of what had happened. Sarah, however, was ruled out as a suspect in the murder. She was devastated by the news of Thomas's death and stunned by the violent outcome of their affair. The police concluded that the affair had simply been the spark that ignited a long-standing resentment within Helen. Beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect marriage, there had been tension, unmet emotional needs, and growing distance. The affair was the breaking point, but it was years of dissatisfaction that ultimately led to the murder. In the end, Helen was charged with first-degree murder. The trial became a dramatic spectacle, with public opinions remaining divided. Some believed she had been a victim of betrayal, while others saw her as a cold, calculating murderer. After days of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of second-degree murder, acknowledging that Helen's emotional state played a significant role in the crime, but also emphasizing that her actions were premeditated. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Helen spent her time in prison reflecting on her actions. She had once been the loving wife, the dedicated mother, and the supportive partner. She had built her life on the foundation of trust and love, but betrayal had shattered it all. The guilt of what she had done weighed heavily on her heart, and she often wondered if there was a way to ever make amends for the devastation she had caused. Would she ever be able to forgive herself? Could she ever rebuild the broken pieces of her life? Though she was never able to truly escape the memories of that night, Helen's journey in prison became one of self-reflection and remorse. In the end, she realized that the pain of betrayal had consumed her so completely that it had blinded her to the love she had once shared with Thomas. The price of revenge, she had learned, was far too great.